Billionaire dumped her at the altar. What she did next shook Paris fashion to its core. Part 1. Chapter 1, The Wedding That Never Was. Hôtel Plaza Athénée, Paris. They said it would be the most extravagant wedding Paris had seen in decades, a union not just of love, but of legacy. Isla Devereux, once the face of nearly every major fashion house on the planet, was to marry Adrian Crest, the billionaire heir of Crest Couture and the man the fashion world had deemed untouchable. The entire city buzzed with anticipation. Paris Fashion Week was just days away, but even the most elite designers had paused their schedules to attend what the press had named the wedding of the century. Paparazzi were stacked outside Hôtel Plaza Athénée like vultures in Valentino, and the red awnings of the historic hotel fluttered beneath a late spring breeze. From the rooftop suites, you could see the Eiffel Tower sparkling against the clouds, like it too had dressed for the occasion. Isla stood in front of the mirror in the hotel's penthouse bridal suite, her breath shallow and slow. Her dress, a custom, pearl-encrusted Elisabeth gown, clung to her body like liquid moonlight. Diamonds shimmered along the hem. Her veil, cathedral length and hand-embroidered, spilled across the marble floor like a trail of stars. She had never looked more ethereal. Or more fragile. Around her, champagne flowed. Her bridesmaids laughed softly, air-kissing and adjusting their flawless makeup. Her mother sniffled behind a silk handkerchief, and a photographer whispered from the corner, capturing the candid perfection of it all. But Isla barely heard them. In her chest, a strange kind of pressure was building, not nerves, exactly, but a weight she couldn't explain. She should have been glowing. She should have been ecstatic. And yet something inside her ached with the quiet, shapeless fear of being watched by the world and still feeling utterly alone. A knock came at the door. Soft, urgent. Her wedding planner entered, her face pale beneath her foundation. "There's a slight delay," she said carefully, forcing a smile. "Nothing to worry about. Just a little wardrobe issue on the groom's side." Isla nodded, but her grip on the bouquet tightened. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 45. Her bridesmaids tried to keep her talking, distracting her with stories and memories, but one by one their voices faded. The hotel staff began whispering. One groomsman stepped outside to take a phone call and didn't return. Isla checked her phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Then, at exactly 4:47 p.m., her phone vibrated. A single message. From Adrian. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." 12 words. No explanation. No punctuation. No goodbye. Isla stared at the screen, her vision blurring as the world around her seemed to narrow into silence. For a moment, she thought she might faint, not from shock, but from the sheer absurdity of it. This couldn't be real. She turned toward the door, where the planner was now crying. Her mother's hand went to her chest. A bridesmaid cursed under her breath. But Isla didn't say a word. She handed the bouquet to no one in particular, walked to the vanity, and looked at herself one last time. A bride. Alone. Downstairs, the chaos had already begun. Journalists caught the news within minutes. The first headline hit Twitter before Isla had even left the room. Breaking: Adrian Crest abandons supermodel bride at the altar. By the time she stepped into the back of a black Rolls-Royce, her image, mascara-stained cheeks, diamond-studded dress clinging to her like betrayal, was splashed across every news feed in the world. No tears. No statement. No explanation. just silence, and the slam of the car door as she disappeared into the Paris streets, leaving the ruins of her wedding behind. And just like that, Isla Devereux vanished. Chapter 2, From Runway to Rock Bottom. It had been 6 months since the wedding that never was, and Paris, along with the rest of the world, had moved on. But Isla Devereux had not. She disappeared the moment the car door shut behind her at Hôtel Plaza Athénée. No farewell interviews. No damage control. Not even a cryptic Instagram caption to feed the tabloids. For a woman whose every movement had once been tracked, filtered, and sold to millions, her silence became louder than any scandal. And the world, hungry for spectacle, turned that silence into a frenzy. The media reacted like sharks circling blood. Gossip sites speculated endlessly. Did Isla suffer a mental breakdown? Supermodel gone rogue after billionaire wedding scandal. Sources say Isla's in rehab in Switzerland, truth or cover-up. Morning talk shows invited therapists to analyze her body language from paparazzi photos. YouTubers made breakdown videos comparing her pre-wedding strut with her tearful departure from the hotel. A true crime podcast even released a 3-part series titled, Missing in Mascara, What Happened to Isla Devereux. The truth was far less glamorous. Isla had retreated to a private estate in the French Alps, a glass and stone mansion nestled by a frozen lake, unreachable by paparazzi and untouched by noise. It was a property she'd purchased years ago but never visited, back when luxury had been intoxicating, not suffocating. The house was cold. Modern. Quiet. She hadn't spoken to her mother in months. Her friends had called for the first few weeks, but their voices eventually faded, replaced by silence and sympathy she never asked for. Her agent sent a single email, "We can spin this if you want. But we need you on camera." She didn't reply. Each morning, she sat at the window wrapped in an oversized cashmere robe, staring out at the icy lake. Her once glamorous nails were chipped. Her flawless complexion was now pale and bare. The designer gown she'd worn on her non-wedding day was boxed and shoved into a closet, too haunting to look at, too expensive to destroy. Meals arrived from town in carefully packed boxes, no staff, no cooks, just delivery left at the gate by a silent driver. She rarely ate them. She rarely spoke at all. Her absence triggered a landslide. Brands that had once built entire campaigns around her face quietly pulled their endorsements. Magazines that had lined up for exclusives moved on to younger, hungrier models with fewer headlines. One by one, she watched as her name faded from Fashion Week guest lists and brand rosters. Adrian Crest, for all his sins, had survived the fallout with surprising ease. His PR team spun the story into a private heartbreak, claiming he had deep regrets but respect for Isla's privacy. Within weeks, he was seen at a charity gala in Dubai, arm in arm with a blonde influencer half his age and half as famous. The tabloids ate it up. Isla, meanwhile, became the cautionary tale. The broken bride. The ghost of haute couture. She let it happen. One morning, she stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The face was still beautiful, sculpted cheekbones, perfect brows, naturally full lips, but the spark had dimmed. Her eyes were hollow. Her shoulders slouched. Her presence, once so commanding it could silence a room, was now a whisper of what had been. She had once been adored by millions. Envied. Worshipped. Now, she was forgotten. But something stirred in her chest that morning. Something small. Insistent. A flicker of what she used to be, not the bride, not the icon, but the woman beneath all the headlines. Not Isla Devereux the supermodel. Not Isla Crest the almost wife. But Isla. Just Isla. She turned away from the mirror, walked barefoot to the fireplace, and pulled an old sketchbook from beneath a stack of untouched fashion magazines. It was filled with designs she had drawn years ago, back when she still believed she could be more than someone else's muse. She stared at a page for a long time. And for the first time in 6 months, she smiled, not out of joy, but out of something fiercer. Something heavier. Not hope. Resolve. Chapter 3, The Billionaire's Bankruptcy. From the outside, Adrian Crest still looked untouchable. He still wore Tom Ford tuxedos to gala dinners. He still flew private from Milan to New York, and posed on red carpets with his jaw clenched like marble. The world still called him the king of modern couture. But behind the flashbulbs and champagne flutes, his empire was rotting from the inside out. Crest Couture, the fashion house founded by Adrian's grandfather and made legendary by his father, had been Adrian's inheritance, and his burden. Though he played the part of the visionary CEO, the truth was more complicated. He wasn't a designer. He wasn't even particularly strategic. He had built his reputation on aesthetic confidence and ruthless networking, not financial prudence or innovation. And for the last 3 years, the numbers had been terrifying. Behind closed doors, his CFO had warned him again and again. We're over-leveraged. The expansion into menswear failed. The influencer capsule lines bled money. You need to restructure, or bring in new capital. But Adrian didn't believe in stepping down. He believed in appearances. So he faked it. He took out silent loans, moved money through shell ventures, sold minority shares under the table, all while publicly flaunting private jets, custom marble offices, and celebrity-laden ad campaigns that cost more than they earned. To the world, he was a billionaire prince of the fashion world. In reality, he was one bad quarter away from collapse. What the world didn't know was that Isla Devereux had been his lifeline. When they'd first met at a Vogue Italia shoot, he hadn't expected to fall for her, but once he did, he realized she could be his brand's salvation. She wasn't just a model. She was the model. Beautiful, powerful, adored globally. Marrying her wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. Their wedding had been more than love. It had been a financial chess move. A merger. By marrying Isla, Adrian had planned to secure a multi-million-dollar licensing deal with her name and likeness. Attract fresh investment by rebranding as a fashion power couple. Use her global relevance to refresh his stagnating empire. And then, he had panicked. Not because he didn't want her. But because deep down, Adrian knew something Isla didn't. If she married him, she'd inherit half a sinking ship. The prenups wouldn't protect her from scandal, and the collapse was too close. He couldn't tether her to his downfall, not after all she had built on her own. So he walked away. Cowardice disguised as mercy. Now, 6 months later, the world still believed he had left her out of ego. That he was cold, heartless. His PR team had done their job. But Adrian didn't care about the gossip. He cared about the mounting panic in his boardroom. Quarterly reports showed red across every page. Investors were getting nervous. High-profile collaborations had fallen through. Several designers who had remained silent after the wedding scandal now refused to work with Crest Couture. whispers about a takeover circled the luxury fashion scene. To save himself, Adrian had begun seeking a silent investor. Someone with deep pockets, and no questions. Someone willing to wire in millions without interfering. He thought he'd found one. A mysterious venture firm, veiled in NDAs and offshore filings, had just acquired 19% of his company. Their name, Orium Holdings. They insisted on total anonymity. Adrian didn't care. He was desperate. He signed the deal in a marble boardroom with shaky hands, sipping whiskey at 10 in the morning, telling himself that survival was always ugly at first. He had no idea who he'd just let in. He told himself Isla was probably living in the south of France, married to a European count, spending her days lounging on yachts with no idea how close he was to ruin. He never imagined that she was watching him. Studying him. Buying pieces of his empire from the shadows, 1% at a time. The press still called her the bride he left behind. But soon, they'd call her something else entirely. Chapter 4, A mysterious backer emerges. In the world of high fashion, nothing spreads faster than a whisper dressed in velvet. The board of Crest Couture was nervous. The numbers were dire, the press had shifted from flattering to skeptical, and Adrian Crest, once the crown jewel of Parisian luxury, was running out of time and options. His silence was expensive. His pride, even more so. And then, just as the vultures began circling, salvation arrived. It came in the form of a sleek, anonymous venture group named Orium Holdings. They didn't ask for creative control. They didn't demand a seat on the board. They only wanted numbers. Financials. Forecasts. They wanted to invest heavily, quietly, and without questions. Their offer was too good. Too clean. Adrian signed without hesitation. But Orium Holdings wasn't real. Not in the way Adrian thought. The company was a legal shell, one of 5, carefully constructed across jurisdictions by a team of Isla's most discreet attorneys and financial strategists. Each move had been made with surgical precision, hidden through multiple international channels and tax havens, all designed to keep her name buried beneath layers of corporate smoke. Because Isla Devereux didn't just want vengeance. She wanted to watch him sweat. She wanted to own the pieces before he realized the game had even begun. And more than anything, she wanted to build something bigger than him. Isla had returned to Paris, but not as a bride, or a model, or a public figure at all. She arrived without paparazzi, without red carpets, wearing sunglasses too large and heels too sharp. She rented a minimalist penthouse in the 7th arrondissement with floor-to-ceiling windows and no mirrors. She no longer needed mirrors to remind her who she was. Every morning, she sipped black espresso and reviewed company ledgers. She learned things Adrian had no idea she could understand. His cash flow. His vendors. His unpaid debts. His fraudulent accounting tricks. His attempts to sell Crest's fragrance line to pay for office renovations. She didn't smile. She calculated. To maintain the illusion of distance, Isla sent a proxy, a ruthless corporate negotiator named Mathilde Rocher, to sit in on strategy calls and board updates. Mathilde was the perfect front, discreet, intimidating, and completely loyal. Adrian hated her on sight. "She's too cold," he muttered to his assistant after their second meeting. "She watches me like she's measuring the cut of my throat." But Mathilde always smiled politely and said nothing. She never mentioned her employer's name. She didn't have to. The scent of power was back in the boardroom, and everyone, including Adrian, could feel it. Week by week, Orium Holdings acquired more shares. Quietly. Strategically. By the end of the quarter, they controlled 23% of Crest Couture, just under the threshold to raise alarm, but enough to dictate the company's pulse. Adrian, still drunk on relief, began planning a comeback. A new collection. A comeback runway. A campaign with younger models, edgier angles, digital buzz. He believed the worst was over. But Isla knew better. She watched from her penthouse window, overlooking the Seine, the entire city spread out like a stage beneath her. This wasn't just about taking what was his. This was about proving that she had always been more than what he thought she was. Not a muse. Not a mannequin. Not a name on his guest list. But a force. Chapter 5, Paris is burning, and so is she. It began with a single photo. A blurry shot, taken from across the street. A tall woman stepping out of a black car outside Maison Courage's during a closed-door couture preview. Oversized sunglasses. A high, razor-sharp bun. A black trench coat cinched at the waist with a gold belt shaped like a snake. No entourage. No publicist. No announcement. No press release. Just a single whisper carried on the wind, Isla's back. Within hours, fashion Twitter exploded. #Isla Watch began trending. Speculation spiraled. Was she at the preview for the Courage's winter collection? She looks different. Better. Did you see the bag? That's not even on the market yet. Photos surfaced of her at a private gallery in Le Marais. Then at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Then on the steps of the Palais Garnier, watching a contemporary ballet no one even knew was scheduled. She wasn't attending events, she was redefining what counted as one. And all the while, she didn't speak. Not to reporters. Not to fans. Not even on social media. Her Instagram remained a frozen grid of pre-wedding glamour and curated memories. She was back, but untouchable. A myth rewritten. When Paris Fashion Week officially opened, Isla Devereux was no longer the question. She was the obsession. Designers whispered about her in backstage corners. Editors traded stories about spotting her in mysterious front row seats. One show reportedly delayed by 15 minutes because of a rumor that Isla was in the audience, though no one could confirm it. She arrived at Vivienne Sauvage's avant-garde runway show wearing a sculptural crimson gown that looked like it had been carved from fire. The room fell silent when she entered. Not because of the dress. Not because of the legend. Because of her face. She wasn't smiling. She was watching. The fashion world wasn't kind. It was calculating. And Isla's reappearance wasn't met with universal praise. Too late to return. She'll never reclaim her spot. She was a mannequin, not a mind. But Isla didn't need praise. She needed eyes, and every pair in Paris was on her now. She was no longer seen as the tragic bride. That version of Isla, the girl in the pearl-encrusted dress, standing alone at the altar, had been buried beneath 6 months of silence and reinvention. Now, she was something new. Something sharper. Something dangerous. A woman who had vanished and returned not with apologies, but with purpose. Adrian Crest saw the headlines. The photos. The chatter. He told his team to ignore it. He told himself it didn't matter. But deep down, something twisted in his chest every time he saw her, not on red carpets, but in dimly lit corners of luxury. At the edge of the front row. At the heart of conversations he wasn't invited to anymore. She hadn't called. She hadn't written. She hadn't demanded anything. But she was everywhere. And worse, her presence was starting to erode his own. Journalists began asking about her again during interviews. Designers began subtly aligning with her orbit. An editor-in-chief was overheard saying, "She's more relevant now than Adrian's entire last collection." He laughed it off. But inside, panic simmered. He had abandoned Isla Devereux thinking she'd disappear. Instead, she was becoming the headline he couldn't escape. Then came the invitation. An exclusive, anonymous fashion event titled simply Revenant. Private salon show. Location revealed to confirmed guests only. The fashion elite clamored to be included. Adrian wasn't on the list. But Isla was. No one knew who was behind it. No one could trace the organizer. But the symbol on the digital RSVP, a stylized Ouroboros, matched the belt she'd worn that day outside Coleridge's. It was a message. Isla wasn't just back in fashion. She was shaping it now. Chapter 6, Boardroom Backstabbers. By the time Crest Couture's quarterly board meeting was called to order, the rot had already reached the velvet seats. The mahogany boardroom table in the Paris headquarters gleamed under the soft light of Murano glass chandeliers. A tray of chilled Perrier bottles sat untouched in the center, next to a bowl of sugar-dusted macarons no one would eat. Behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seine drifted silently in the pale morning sun, oblivious to the silent war about to unfold inside. Adrian Crest walked in late, tailored, tanned, exhausted, hiding the panic behind a crisp navy Brioni suit and the kind of swagger only inherited arrogance could produce. He tossed his phone onto the table with the confidence of a man who believed he still had control. He didn't. Across from him sat Mathilde Rocher, Orium Holdings proxy, Isla's secret weapon in stilettos. She was cold and brilliant, her reputation carved from the wreckage of 3 Fortune 500 turnarounds. Her lipstick was the color of dried blood. Her nails were blunt and painted matte black. She never raised her voice. She never blinked longer than necessary. She smelled faintly of vetiver and expensive danger. The other board members, mostly men in their 50s with more ego than ethics, glanced at her with a mix of disdain and caution. No one trusted her. But no one dared challenge her, either. Not after last month's financial audit, initiated by Mathilde, backed by Orium's growing voting power, and executed with surgical cruelty. The report had exposed just enough incompetence in Adrian's recent decisions to undermine his confidence, but not enough to strip him of his title, yet. Adrian cleared his throat. "I'm sure everyone's read the Q1 report," he began, his tone light, performative. "Obviously the macroeconomic climate is shifting, but we're still seeing solid engagement with our new collections." "You're hemorrhaging liquidity," Mathilde interrupted, not even looking up from her folder. "Your influencer collaborations cost more to produce than they earn in conversion. Your loyalty program failed. And your Shanghai licensing deal is bleeding over €7 million. The silence was surgical. Adrian's jaw clenched. "The Shanghai deal is a long-term play. Unfortunately, the board has asked to see short-term results," she said with a soft, cutting smile. "We're voting on budget cuts today." Adrian glanced around the table. Half the board members wouldn't meet his eye. The others offered polite, useless expressions, the kind corporate men wear when they are already halfway off the sinking ship, looking for lifeboats. One of them, Henry Dubois, who had toasted Adrian's visionary genius just 6 months earlier, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps a leaner approach might be appropriate," he said gently, like talking to a child with scissors. Adrian stared at him. Then at the others. Then at Mathilde. He didn't know it yet, but the floor beneath him was already collapsing. The knives were out. And every one of them had his initials etched into the handle. Across the city, Isla Devereux watched the board meeting from a secure live stream on her laptop, curled into a velvet armchair in her penthouse, barefoot, her hair twisted into a loose bun. She sipped espresso and barely blinked. Her lawyers had secured access months ago, an oversight Adrian had unknowingly approved during a rushed vote on IT infrastructure. Every camera angle, every eye twitch, every bead of sweat, she saw it all. She watched Adrian bluff, pivot, charm. She watched him sweat. But most importantly, she watched the board, and how they began to turn on him. Slowly. Cowardly. With the same passive-aggressive condescension they had once turned on her, when she had dared speak in meetings about diversity, about sustainability, about long-term creative risks. She remembered their smirks. Their patronizing nods. The way they dismissed her like a spoiled child with a pretty face. Now, she owned 26% of the company. And they didn't even know it. By the end of the meeting, 3 of Adrian's key initiatives had been frozen. The marketing budget was slashed. A vote was scheduled to review executive compensation, thinly veiled code for an audit of his own salary. He left the room in silence. Mathilde remained seated, reviewing notes, her red pen slicing through the agenda like a scalpel. When she finally stood, she paused at Adrian's chair, running one fingertip along the leather as if testing its strength. "Mr. Crest," she said quietly, her voice almost affectionate, "you may want to cancel next season's yacht preview. Shareholders are starting to ask questions." He didn't respond. He couldn't. Because for the first time in his carefully curated life, Adrian Crest wasn't the one in control. Chapter 7, Fashion's New Queen. It began, as all revolutions do, with a dress. Not just any dress. A silken, backless midnight creation that shimmered like oil under the lights of the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, where the opening gala of Paris Fashion Week's second phase was being held. Guests arrived dripping in couture, but when Isla Devereux stepped out of the elevator, the air in the room shifted. Not with applause. Not with gasps. But with reverent, stunned silence. Gone was the supermodel in bridal white who had been abandoned on the altar of the Hôtel Plaza Athénée. Gone was the disappeared woman whom tabloids had whispered about in hushed speculation. In her place stood someone colder, cleaner, more precise. Her hair was parted sharply and pinned into a low knot. Her makeup, deliberate and sharp, a slash of burgundy across her lips. She wore no jewelry, just the dress. It fit like skin, with seams so flawless they seemed conjured, not stitched. As she moved, heads turned like sunflowers following the light. But Isla wasn't smiling. She was calculating. By the time she reached the second glass of champagne, 5 fashion blogs had already published exclusive, Isla Devereux's first public appearance. A journalist from Elle Officiel snapped a photo that would, by dawn, go viral. Isla standing alone beneath a marble archway, staring into the distance, looking not like a guest, but like a challenge. Isla Devereux returns, and Paris just bent the knee. Vanity and online. We tried not to call her a queen. We failed. Vogue France. The most powerful woman in fashion hasn't said a word. She doesn't need to. The Guardian style. What they didn't know, not yet, was that Isla's name was now on design documents, on investment portfolios, on financial reports and brand briefs. Through her venture shell Orium Holdings, she had acquired a silent controlling interest in not one, but 3 rising luxury houses. Her fingerprints were on runway notes and collection strategy. 2 of the hottest young designers in Europe were already secretly backed by her. One was designing exclusively for her next private salon show. She wasn't modeling the future of fashion. She was building it. Across the city, Adrian Crest read the headlines with his jaw clenched and knuckles white against his espresso cup. The image of Isla in black appeared on every screen he passed, in the car, in the elevator, even on the smart mirror in his penthouse bathroom. His phone buzzed endlessly with requests for comment. His PR team asked if he wanted to post a message. He declined. The worst part wasn't the resurgence. The worst part was how completely she had changed the conversation. 6 months ago, she had been his ex. Now he was hers. Later that night, Isla attended a rooftop after-party hosted by a major editor from Harper's Bazaar. She arrived late, fashionably, of course, and was offered the center seat on a velvet sofa beneath a sculpture of Aphrodite. Everyone noticed. Even the host. When the editor jokingly said, "We should have saved that seat for the Queen," Isla tilted her head, raised her glass, and said softly, "Don't worry. I just took it." By the end of the week, she had landed 3 cover offers. A luxury brand that once pulled her contract had quietly reached out for a collaboration. A rising Gen Z fashion critic called her the post-glamour era's first true empress. More importantly, she hadn't even launched her label yet. Because Isla wasn't here to simply make a comeback. She wasn't here to be a muse again. She was here to rule. Chapter 8, The First Encounter. They hadn't seen each other in 6 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. Not since the wedding that didn't happen. Not since she stood alone in a €5 million dress while the world watched her heart implode in real time. Not since his text. 12 cold, gutless words. Now, on a Thursday night glittering with excess and ego, Isla Devereux walked into the Grand Atrium of the Louvre des Lumières, and Adrian Crest looked up, and finally saw the woman he had left behind. The event was hosted by Maison Fontaine, one of the oldest surviving couture houses in Paris. It was a celebration of their 150th anniversary, an ultra-exclusive gala limited to royalty, billionaires, and fashion titans. The setting was decadent, gold-trimmed columns, live classical quartets, and flickering candlelight illuminating the walls like a cathedral to vanity. It was the kind of place where power wore perfume and secrets came dressed in silk. Isla had received her invitation weeks ago. Adrian's came late, a mercy from a senior editor who hadn't yet decided which side to align with. They weren't supposed to be there together. But fate, or vengeance, had other plans. Isla arrived precisely 47 minutes after the scheduled start, fashionably and intentionally late. She wore a dark emerald gown, sleek, minimal, high-collared, with a thigh-high slit that defied gravity. Her hair was pulled into a severe twist. Her eyes were lined with cold and indifference. People stopped talking when she entered. She didn't scan the room. She didn't search for him. She knew he was there. She walked with the calm precision of a woman who had already won. Adrian was standing by the bar, sipping something aged and expensive, mid-conversation with a Danish finance mogul. His words caught in his throat the second he saw her, and for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he froze. She looked changed. Not just in style or poise. There was something in her expression, not anger. Not even triumph. Something more dangerous. Detachment. She wasn't there to confront him. She wasn't even thinking about him. She was beyond him. And that terrified him. They collided near the central fountain, amid a swirl of murmured gossip and champagne. No one spoke to them directly, but everyone watched, discreetly, hungrily, as if a moment of myth had unfolded in real time. Adrian moved first. Isla, he said, his voice low, cautious, reverent. She turned slowly. Her eyes scanned his face like a critic reviewing something overpriced and underdesigned. Adrian. Her voice was silk, sharp at the edges. A pause. The air thickened. You look, he began. Recovered, she offered, tilting her head. Yes. I've heard it's fashionable now. He exhaled through his nose. I wanted to explain. Now, she asked, her brow rising. After 6 months. No text. No call. Just this. He swallowed hard. I thought giving you space was the least I could do. You thought space would be enough, she corrected. You thought silence would dissolve memory. That I would vanish. He looked away, just for a moment, and she knew she'd hit her mark. But I didn't vanish, she continued softly, stepping closer. I built. I created. I became something you never expected. Adrian's gaze flickered. Is that what this is about? Revenge. Isla's smile was small. Chilling. No, Adrian. Revenge is too easy. This is about balance. You took from me. Now, I've taken back. He looked at her then, not as a woman he once loved, not as the broken bride he had left behind, but as something entirely new. An opponent. A threat. A queen returned to reclaim her kingdom. She turned without waiting for a reply and walked away, her heels echoing like a countdown in his ears. The crowd parted for her like water, awed and wary. Later that night, a photograph of their encounter surfaced online, grainy, slightly out of focus, but electric. Isla in profile, unbothered. Adrian watching her like a man who'd just realized his empire had a leak, and the sea was rising. Chapter 9, The Spy in Silk. A war was being waged inside the sleek, mirrored corridors of Crest Couture, but no one could hear the sound of it, not yet. No gunfire. No screaming. Just footsteps. Heels. The whisper of fabric. And a woman with secrets stitched into every seam of her dress. Her name was Celeste Moyo, and she had been hired by Crest Couture as a senior PR strategist, brought in under the recommendation of Orium Holdings, a gift from the venture group Adrian believed was quietly saving him. What he didn't know was that Celeste was no ordinary strategist. She wasn't there to polish his image. She was there to bury it. Celeste was elegant, calculated, and disarmingly beautiful. A former fashion editor with a reputation for charm and confidentiality, she had been handpicked by Isla herself. Not because she was loyal, though she was, but because she was believable. She had the look. The walk. The pedigree. Adrian never questioned her when she arrived. In fact, he barely looked at her twice, too distracted by quarterly disasters and increasing pressure from the board. To him, she was another polished ornament in a company built on surfaces. To Isla, she was a scalpel. Celeste quickly made herself indispensable. She organized high-profile interviews, smoothed over influencer relationships, secured a glossy feature in a mid-tier American fashion magazine to make it seem like Crest couture was rebounding. She became known in the office as the fixer, the one who could spin anything. What no one realized was that while she was polishing the brand externally, she was feeding Isla everything. Internal memos, product testing reports, financial data, personal emails from Adrian's executive assistant, legal drafts of Adrian's attempt to renegotiate his contract to protect himself from potential ousting. Each file was forwarded to Isla every evening, delivered in encrypted batches by courier. Isla read them in silence, her penthouse growing into a war room of black folders and silver paper clips. She marked every betrayal with a red pen, every vulnerability with a gold one. Adrian was hemorrhaging credibility, and he had no idea. Then came the sabotage, so gentle, it felt like bad luck. Celeste accidentally delayed the RSVP list for a Vogue-sponsored runway preview by 48 hours. Major editors didn't receive their invitations until it was too late. The event turned into a PR failure. She suggested a bold new hire for the men's accessories division, a former designer with a history of volatile behavior and burned contracts. Adrian approved him. Within 2 weeks, he had offended 3 buyers and leaked concept sketches to the press. Celeste handled the fallout with grace, of course. "We're doing our best," she would say. Adrian's under immense pressure. She was painting him as a man unraveling, and he didn't even see it. Every night, Isla reviewed the fallout like a conductor studying her orchestra. She never moved too quickly, never too obviously. She let the house wobble, never push. Let Adrian believe in his own control while she quietly rewrote the rhythm of his downfall. One evening, as she sat on her terrace overlooking the Seine, she whispered to herself, "Collapse doesn't need force. It just needs weight." And she was piling it on. For the first time in years, Adrian found himself second-guessing everything. Emails didn't get answered. Editorials were critical instead of glowing. Buyers pulled out of pre-orders. His board grew colder, more formal. There was talk of restructuring, strategic pivots, temporary leadership transitions. He couldn't point to one moment, one failure. But he felt it in his bones. And one night, when he walked into his office late and found Celeste standing at his desk, reviewing notes, something flickered in the back of his mind, a shadow of suspicion. She smiled at him warmly, perfectly. "Long night?" she asked. He hesitated. "Always. Because every broken heart deserves a comeback." If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional romance every week. Hit like, drop a comment, and ring the bell so you never miss a moment of betrayal, redemption, and powerful love. And don't keep the drama to yourself, share this story with someone who lives for twists just like you. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is becoming unforgettable.